In chapter 14, Naya is talking about how for 3 days drilling has been taking place in her village. And so on page 83, it begins with for 3 days, the air around Naya's home was filled with the sound of the drill. But on the third afternoon, Naya joined the other children gathered around the drill site. The grown ups rose from their work pounding rocks and drifted over too. And there's some excitement that's taking place in the adults. And so the kids are coming over to see what's going on. It says they were moving quickly as their leader called out orders. Then they end up seeing this water come up out of the ground. And it says a spray of water shot high into the air. And this wasn't water that, remember, they were bringing water to the place where they were drilling because otherwise they couldn't drill if it was dry. So they kept carrying water to the drill. But this isn't that water. This is water that was coming up from the ground. Anaya's section says that this was new water, water that was coming up out of the hole. So everyone begins to cheer. Everyone's celebrating. The guy who was at the hole when the water started coming up out of the ground where they were drilling, he gets drenched in the water, and so they're laughing at him and they're celebrating. And it says at the bottom of page 83 that a woman in the crowd began singing a song of celebration, and Naya clapped her hands along with all the other children. So they're singing, there's laughter, there's cheering, and it's this big celebration because finally they have water, and this is a good thing. It says, but as Naya watched the water spraying out of the borehole, she frowned. And she frowned because over on page 84 it says the water was not clear. It was brown and heavy looking. It was full of mud. And this is not the water that they wanted. And so the cheering comes to a stop because they see muddy water. And this is not the desire of the people. So remember the theme of the story that we're reading about with Salva, and even for Naya, is don't give up. Don't give up no matter how hard it gets. And we've seen for both Salva and Naya that they had a tough life and they went through hardships. Salva's seems a little more dramatic and traumatic in what he experiences as far as the death of people he's loved and being alone and orphaned and all the walking he's done to find a place where he is safe and he can live his life. So in chapter 14 for Salva's section, we see that he is now 22 years old. And remember, he was 11 when he first ran with the other students into the bushes and started his journey. And he's in these refugee camps in Kenya for 5 years. And the first one he's in is Kakuma, and that he's in that refugee camp for 2 years. It says on page 84 that Kakuma had been a dreadful place, isolated in the middle of dry, windy desert. Tall fences of barbed wire enclosed the camp. And so in the pictures on the slide, the top picture is a picture I found online of the Kakuma refugee camp. And so you see they have like makeshift housing for people, and it was full of people. There were a lot of people there. It says 70,000 people lived in Kakuma, but the belief is that there was more than that. But 70,000 people were living there in this refugee camp. But Salva's not happy there. He says that with all the barbed wire that's enclosing the camp and the rules, because if you leave, you're not allowed to come back. So people are stuck there. And he says it almost felt like a prison. And so he's not happy there. And it says that there were families who escaped together. And so there were groups of families there. But most of the people who were there in this camp were refugees who were orphan boys, and there were young men like Salva. And so this is the majority of the people there. There was an issue with the camp for the local people who lived outside of the camp. They were not happy about the camp being there. And they would even break into the camp and steal the things from the refugees. And remember, the refugees didn't have hardly anything. And so, but they were being robbed from the local people, and it wasn't a good place. So Salva decides, he hears of this other camp, and he decides that he wants to go to the other camp and give it a try. And the hope is that it's better than the Kakuma camp. So on page 85, it says, once again, Salva and a few other young men walked for months. So, he's already been on several long walks to go to these refugee camps, and it's worth it to him to take another journey to try to find a better place to live. So when they reached the camp at Ifo, they found that things were no different than at Kakuma. Everyone was always hungry, there was never enough food, and many of the people were sick or were injured during their journeys. And so there was a few medical volunteers, but there's not enough to care for everyone who needed the help. So it says Salva felt fortunate that at least he was in good health. And he wants to work. He wants to do something where he can make a little money and probably spend his time, doing something that will keep his mind off of just sitting and waiting to see what'll happen. But it says that there was no work. There was nothing to do but wait. And they were waiting for the next meal, for the news of the world outside the camp. And the days were long and empty, and they stretched into weeks, then months, then years. But it says that towards the bottom of 85 that it was hard to keep hope alive when there was so little to feed it. So he's just sitting there day by day with nothing to do, and he longs to have something to do. It's not that he's being lazy or anything, he just doesn't have anything that he can do. But then we come across a new friend for Salva, and this guy's name is Michael. And Michael is from Ireland, and he's come over like many of the aid workers have from other countries. And they come in and they work with the refugees and they spend some time with them. But these people always go back home, and they're not usually there for longer than a month or maybe a couple of months. So Salva meets Michael, and a lot of the aid workers that come through speak English, so he hears a lot of English, and he gets to where he understands some English. And then it says he even tries to speak some English, but um, on page 86, towards the top, that first start of the paragraph, it says, but after so many years in the camps, Salva could understand a little English, and that he tried to speak English once in a while. And Michael seems to understand him when he does try to speak English. And so Michael offers to teach him to read, and he wants to teach him to read English. So it says on page 86 that the lesson started that day. Why wait, right? Salva has nothing else to do. Michael's there to help. So they start the lessons that day. And Michael gives Salva a paper that he wrote the A, B, C on. And so Salva walks around practicing saying A, B, and C, and then he even sits and tries to write it in the sand so it looks like the letters on the paper that Michael gave him. He's learning quickly, and Michael says to him one day, this is on page 87, he says, you learn fast because you work so hard. And it says Salva did not say what he was thinking, that he was working hard because he wanted to learn to read English before Michael left the camp. He didn't know how long Michael was going to be there. And so he wanted to learn everything he could while Michael was there. So he was really working really hard to learn everything he could. And it says Salva did not know if any of the other aid workers would take the time to teach him. Nobody has yet. Michael's the first one to even offer to teach him to read English. None of the other workers have done that. And so he wants to take advantage of Michael being willing to help him, and Michael's there. But Michael does tell him, you know what, Salva, you're working hard, and it's good to have some fun sometimes. Let's take a break from work. Let's do something a little bit different. And he says, you're really tall, so you should be good at this. And he teaches him how to play volleyball. It goes on to say on page 87 towards the bottom that there starts to be a rumor that's being spread, and the rumor has to do with the United States, America. And so the rumor is that some of the orphaned boys are going to be chosen to go to America. They're going to be sent to America, and it's going to be 3,000 boys. And so Salva hears this from the people, but then they start hearing it from the aid workers. And so they know that, okay, this is going to happen. And what they did is they would put the names of the boys who were chosen on a post that they would set up in the camp. And if you saw your name on there, you were going. And so Salva goes and he doesn't see his name. And that's several times that there's new postings and his name is never on the list. And so he notices that a lot of well, first they're told that they're only going to take healthy people. So if they're sick, they're not going to be able to go. And if they ever fought or had been a soldier with the rebels, they were not going to be able to go either. And so Salva is healthy, and Salva's never fought with the rebels. So he would be a good candidate. But it seems to him when he sees the names on the list that everybody's young, and he feels like maybe he's too old to be chosen. And so this bothers him a little bit because it looks like each time that he goes to the list, his name's not there. Like it's getting like more and more discouraging to him. And so he's losing hope. But remember, the theme is don't give up. So, Salva doesn't give up, but he is discouraged. And it says at the top of page 89, sometimes he felt he was being torn in two by the hoping and the not hoping. And so this is an issue for him. But one day Michael comes to him and he tells him that he saw the list and Salva's name is on the list. And Salva thinks maybe it's a different Salva, so he doesn't want to get his hopes up. But he goes over and he looks at the list, and sure enough, it's his name. And it tells him that he's going to go to Rochester, New York. So Salva is headed to America. All right, so chapter 15, Naya, her situation is presented here on page 90. It says, even though the water spraying out of the borehole was brown and muddy, some of the little boys wanted to drink right away. And remember when they were drinking the muddy water and Naya's sister got sick in it, so it's not something they should be drinking. And so it says their mothers held them back. The men kept on working with the drill. Their leader talked to Naya's uncle and father and some of the other village men. Later, Deb, her brother, explained things to her. Don't worry, he said. The water is muddy because it is still mixed with the old water that they are using from the pond. They have to drill farther down to make sure of getting deep enough into the good, clean water underground. And then they have to put in the pipes and make a foundation for the gravel, and then install the pump and pour cement around it. And the cement has to dry. And so this is a process that has to take place. And, Naya's not going to have been aware of that process. It said it would be several more days. It would be several more days before they could drink the water, Depp said. Naya sighed and picked up the big plastic can. Yet another walk to the pond. So she still has to be going back and forth to the pond, and she's ready for the water in the middle of the village to be ready for them to use there, so she doesn't have to keep going back to the pond. In chapter 15 for Salva, we see that he is now being called by a name that these group of boys who were chosen to go to America were being called. And he finds out that they're being called the Lost Boys. And it says that they were called the Lost Boys because they were boys who had lost their homes and families because of the war and had wandered lost for weeks or months at a time before reaching the refugee camps. And remember, he's been lost for years at this point as well. It says the aid worker explained this to Salva and to the 8 other boys he would be traveling with. And the woman spoke English, and so it was difficult for him to really understand everything she was saying. She tried her best to speak slowly, but she had many things to tell them, and Salva worried that he might misunderstand something important. So he's trying to pay attention, he's trying to listen, he's trying to understand everything she's saying. But they go from the refugee camp and they go to Nairobi, and they are there. This is the capital city of Kenya, and this is where they're going to go to the airport and take a flight that will take them to Frankfurt, Germany. And now he's, been in uh, a couple of countries because he traveled over to Ethiopia and he's in Kenya now. And he was from the Sudan, but now he's going to Germany where he'll board another plane. But before they get on the plane, they're in Nairobi and he's having to fill out paperwork. He's getting medical examinations done. But it says it was all a blur to Salva because he's so excited he can't sleep. And because he can't sleep, he's just too tired to really understand and to contemplate what's going on. And so everything's kind of, his memory on it is kind of blurred just because he was so tired. But he's also given something that he's never really had before. He's given some new clothes. And it says that he's been wearing clothes, old pair of shorts, and an even older t-shirt. And so his clothes, the shorts, the elastic is out in it. So they're, hanging on him. And then his shirt has holes in it. So he's given this new pair of clothes to put on. And so this is something new for him. And it says on page 92 that his arms were also piled high with new clothes. And he got underwear, socks, sneakers, a pair of long pants, a t-shirt, and a long sleeve shirt to wear on top of it. And he was to wear all these clothes at the same time. Now where he's from, it's warmer weather, and so they don't need a lot of clothes, but then they also didn't have a lot of clothes. And even clothes that were sent to the refugee camps, there wasn't enough for all the people. So if they got donations of clothes, some people were able to get clothes, but many of them were not. And so, but he has all these clothes and he's supposed to wear all of these at once. And he's never had so many clothes on his body before. But the worker tells him that it's winter in America. And I don't know if you've been to New York, but it's cold in the winter up there. And this would be something that Salva is not used to. So he goes and, they tell him that when he gets to New York, he's going to get more clothes. And so in his mind, he cannot fathom how in the world they could give him any more clothes and how he's going to wear all of those clothes. So he gets on the airplane and again, this is something he's never done. He's never ridden on a plane before. And he finds it. Okay, I apologize, Sean. My daughter's friend is calling, and that's why sometimes you might hear the computer ringing. So, anyway, so he's on this airplane, and he doesn't like he sees all the plush seats, and he sees these people traveling with luggage, and so he's just observing all of these things and taking it all in. And then he watches out the window as the plane is ascending into the sky. And he's looking at how big the world is, but how small things are. And, remember with him traveling and walking, I can imagine that he thinks about all the distance he traveled on feet and how long it took. And then look at all the distance he's going to go and how little time it's really going to take. But they're flying, and the stewardess comes by and asks him if he would like a drink. And it says on page 93 that Salva looked up at the woman in her neat uniform and shook his head to show that he did not understand. She smiled. Coca-Cola? Orange juice? And the word Coca-Cola is something that's familiar to him, and it makes him kind of excited because long ago, Salva's father had once brought a few bottles of Coca-Cola back from his trip to the market, and Salva's first taste had been startling, all those bubbles jumping around in his mouth. What a rare treat it had been. Coca-Cola, thank you, Salva said, and with each sip, he remembered his family, passing the bottles from hand to hand, laughing at the trickly bubbles, sharing and laughing together. So this brings back a good memory for Salva. And I find this kind of the situation kind of funny in a way because Coca-Cola, I know years ago especially, their logo and their slogan was, something, it was the idea that they bring people together. And here, this Coca Cola brings on fond memories of his family and time that he spent with them. And so it's a very appropriate, uh, not comparison, but it's a very appropriate situation that is taking an item and just helping him remember some good times. So he gets on 3 planes to get to Rochester, New York, and he goes to from Nairobi to Germany, Frankfurt, Germany, and then he goes from Germany to New York. And remember, he's been traveling with 8 boys, and so once he gets to New York City, he has to get on another plane. This time he's not going to be traveling with these 8 boys. He's going to go alone because he has to travel to Rochester, New York still. So it says in New York City, the aid worker led the boys to different gates. This is on page 94. Some would be making the final leg of their trip alone, while others were in groups of 2 or 3. Salva was the only one going to Rochester. The aid worker said that his new family would be waiting for him there. But I think Salva's a little intimidated and a little scared. Because what if he gets there and they're not waiting for him? What if he gets there and no one is there? And so he really has time to think about that while he's on the plane. It says on the plane to Rochester, most of the passengers were men traveling on their own, so probably businessmen. It says, but there were some women too, and a few families, mothers and father and children. Most of the people were white. Beginning at the airport in Frankfurt, Salva had seen more white people in the last few hours than he had seen before in his whole lifetime. And so this is something he's noticing. He tried not to stare, but he couldn't help studying the families closely, and thoughts kept looping through his mind. What if my new family isn't there? What if they have changed their minds? What if they meet me and don't like me? So these are those doubts that are going through his mind. And I think very common and understandable doubts too. We would probably feel the same way if we were in the same situation, meeting a new family, and are they going to like me enough to want me to be with them, or are they going to have changed their minds even and not even be there? So at the bottom of page 94, it says Salva took a deep breath and he thinks a step at a time. Do you remember who that came from? Who's the one um, who had him on his journey just look at the next step? That was his uncle, right? And so, a step at a time, this is that lesson he learned from his uncle. And so, he reminds himself about that. Just this flight to get through for now. So, that's all he needs to focus on is that flight. He doesn't need to worry about what's going to happen when it lands because we're just taking it one step at a time. So he gets to Rochester and he sees the family is there. And at the top of page 95, it says, there they were, smiling and waving in the airport lobby. His new family. Chris is the father, Luis is the mother, and they have 4 children. So Salva considers that he's going to have siblings once again, just like he did before. And he felt his shoulders relax a little on seeing their eager smiles, so that helped him. But Salva says hello and thank you a lot to them, and he's trying to um, remember other things that he could say, but he's just not. I mean, he's going to be tired, number one, and then two, nervous and confused. And it says, for in his fatigue and confusion, these were the only words he felt sure about. So he didn't want to try to say anything but hello and thank you. And then Luis talks a lot and fast. And I feel like I this would be like me because I feel like I talk fast a lot and I try to slow down, but she's probably really excited to have Salva there. And so she's trying to tell him everything and talk to him so he feels comfortable. But she also speaks quickly. And so he's not even sure, it says. At first, he was not sure she was even speaking English because she spoke so quickly. And so, but he finds out that yes, indeed, he was told there would be more clothes for him in New York. and his family has them. So he has a big puffy jacket. This is on towards the bottom of 95, a hat, a scarf, and gloves. So he puts on the jacket and he zips it up. And the sleeves were so bulky that he felt as if he couldn't move his arms properly. He wondered if he looked very foolish now, um, with his body and arms so fat and his legs so thin. But none of the family laughed at him, and he soon noticed that they were all wearing the same kind of jacket. And they're wearing this because it's cold. Remember, it's winter, so there's snow on the ground and everything. It says the glass doors of the airport terminal slid open. The frigid air hit Salva's face like a slap. He's never experienced this before. He's always lived in an area where it was warmer weather. Even their coldest weather was like in the 70s. And so he's never been somewhere where he's been cold and freezing cold. And so this is a big adjustment for him. And so it says when he inhaled, he thought his lungs would surely freeze solid and stop working. This is on page 96. But all around him, people were still walking and talking and moving about. So they weren't like being like frozen in place or anything. Apparently, it was possible to survive in such cold temperatures, and now he understood the need for the awkward padded jacket. He understands that it was needed for warmth. Salva stood still inside the terminal doors for a few moments. Leaving the airport felt like leaving his old life forever. Sudan, his village, and his family. Tears came to his eyes, perhaps from the cold air blowing in through the open doors. His new family was already outside. They turned and looked back at him. Salva blinked away the tears and took his first step into a new life in America. So I think he was, seeing this. It's a new time. It's a time to be excited. He's had time to grieve and to process that his family is gone, and he needs to move on in life. But at the same time, now that he really is moving on in life, I think this is very emotional for him, and it would be for so many people. So he thinks about them, and does it mean he has to move on from them totally and forget about them? No. But taking that step outside of the door of that airport was him leaving that behind and not knowing that he's ever going to go back to it. And so this is a big step for him. And so he takes in a deep breath and he goes.